right, we are live on Facebook. Okay, good to see everybody. Just give us 1 second. We get everything set up and mute you all. I like Zoom because you can mute everybody. Normally you can't mute people. Gives me an opportunity to keep people quiet. Okay, so anyway, so we just muted everybody. And I think we are ready to roll, if that's all right. And by Arjuna's instruction, I've changed my microphone position. So it should be better and clearer. Okay. So we are ready. Just let me put myself up there. Alrighty. Go Ranga. Okay, so we're going to chant Jai Radha Madhava. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunya Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunya Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Randana. Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhuva Kunya Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunya Bihari. Gopi Jana Malava Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Malava Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhuva Kunya Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunya Bihari. Gopi Jana Malabha Girivardhari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Vraja Jana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhuva Kunya Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhuva Kunya Bihari. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Paravidakacharya also Teta Sachashi Shimad. His Divine Grace Savaya Charanada Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnav Vrindikajai Namacharya Shirahuidas Thakur Vijay Param Se Go Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shidvaita Gadadha Shivasati Gaur Bhakta Vrindikajai Shri Shri Radhakrishna Gopinath Shyam Kund Radhakunda Giri Govardhan ki jai, Vrindavanam ki jai, Maturam ki jai, Jagannath Swami ki jai, Yamunamai ki jai, Shrimati Tulasi Devi ki jai, Samaveda Bhakta Vrindi ki jai, Gaur Premananda Hari Hari Bol. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So, Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Namani Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravadi Pachari Nivishesha Srinivadi Paschatave Satarni. So, Om Gana Timidanda Shagaranjana Shalakaya Chakshuran Meditam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So I offer my respectful obeisances unto the lotus feet of my spiritual master, His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Srila Prabhupada, who so kindly opened my eyes with a torch light of knowledge while I was blinded in the darkness of ignorance. So by Srila Prabhupada's mercy, we're going to continue with our study of Bhagavadgita tonight, and we are on the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. I think we're in text 22. Let us move ahead. Okay, text 22. Give me 1 second. Alrighty. So this chapter is entitled Opulence of the Absolute, or also it's also Vibhuti Yoga. Vibhuti means opulences in this particular context. So, Vedanam Samavedosmi, Devanam Asmi Vasavaha, Indriyanam Manaschasmi, Utanam Asmi Chaitana. Vedanam of all the Vedas, Samavedaha, the Samaveda, Asmi, I am. Devanam of all the demigods, Asmi, I am. Vasavaha, the heavenly king, Indriyanam, of all the senses, Manaha, the mind, Cha, also Asmi, I am, Bhutanam, of all living entities, Asmi, I am, Chaitana, the living force. Of the Vedas, I am the Samaveda. Of the demigods, I am Indra, the king of heaven. Of the senses, I am the mind, and in the living beings, I am the living force, consciousness. So, of course, the Samaveda is the Veda that deals with mostly the musical stuff, you know, the rhythms and everything like that, of how you pronounce the different Vedic mantras. Okay. And the demigods, Indra is the head of the administrative demigods, also the king of heaven. And the mind is supposed to control the other senses. And in the living beings, we're the Atma, or Krishna is the Atma. Now, let's make it very clear as we go through all these different opulences of Krishna, that Krishna is represented by these opulences, and in one sense, Krishna is manifest in those opulences, but in another sense, Krishna is different from the opulences. And of course, this involves, again, the Achincha, Beta, Beta, Tattva philosophy. Let me just change my seat. Okay. Again, this involves the Achincha, Beta, Beta, Tattva philosophy. That means how God is one and different from everything simultaneously. Achincha, Beta, Abeta, Tattva. So, this is just to give us an idea of Krishna's powers. This is not to indicate that we should worship these particular things. You understand? Let's adjust this thing. Okay, adjusted. For example, it's not that you worship Indra because Indra represents Krishna. It's not that you worship your mind or you worship your jiva soul. Of course, you can worship the Samaveda because that's directly emanating from the breathing of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But Krishna is giving different instances of his energies and opulences to help us understand that he's God and how great he is. Not that we worship all these things separate from Krishna and we think that worship of all these things is the same as worship of Krishna. So Prabhupada explains the difference between matter and spirit is that matter has no consciousness like the living entity. Therefore, this consciousness is supreme and eternal. Consciousness cannot be produced by a combination of matter. That's a very powerful statement. And the scientists will say, at least the materialistic scientists will say, that consciousness is an epiphenomena. Remember that word, you can really impress people. It's an epiphenomena of matter. That means, basically, it's produced by matter. If you have the sufficient or the proper elements together in their proper combination, properly arranged and everything like that, then you get consciousness. This is nonsense. Consciousness cannot be produced by any sort of combination, especially even in a computer. A computer can emulate consciousness. I'll give you an example right now as we're talking. I am going to address one of the many computer items I have in my house. And you're going to hear it reply to me. It's Mr. Google or Mrs. Google. Listen to this. Okay, Google, what time is it?
It's 5:12.
Okay. It appears like it's conscious. Let's try something else. Okay, Google, do you like me?
I sure do. You're so dreamy. I'm surprised that it doesn't put me into sleep mode. Do you want to answer some questions and find out what kind of team we'd make?
No.
Okay, just let me know if you ever want to talk.
So, I know you all consider that very humorous. I think you could hear what was going on. And anyway, so that's an emulation of consciousness. This computer is able to recognize certain words, and it has certain set patterns to respond to. Now, if I say something that it doesn't have a pattern already programmed in by some person, it won't know how to respond. And I'm not going to try that. We have enough fun for right now. Okay, so next text. Rudranam Shankarashchasme Vitesho Yaksho Rakshasam Vasunam Pavakaschasme Meru Shikarinam Maham. Rudranam of all the Rudras, Shankara, Lord Shiva, Cha also as me, I am. Vita Ishaha, the Lord of the treasury of the demigods, Yaksha Rakshasam, of the Yakshas and Rakshasas, Vasunam, of the Vasus, Pavaka, fire, Cha also as me, I am. Meru, Meru, Shikarinam, of all mountains, Aham, I am. Of all the Rudras, I am Lord Shiva. Of the Yakshas and Rakshasas, I am the Lord of wealth, Kuvera. And of the Vasus, I am fire, Agni. And of the mountains, I am Meru. So Krishna is just presenting the greatest in each category, okay? That's all. And that represents Krishna in the sense that it gives you an indication of how great Krishna is, but it's not a complete indication, a full indication. It's just a tiny little indication. Like if you look up in the sky and say, of all the sky, of all the visions that you have, the sky, I represent the sky. You know, it's the same thing. Krishna's just trying to impress those who need to be impressed. So, purport. There are 11 Rudras, of whom Shankara Lord Shiva is predominant. He is the incarnation of the Supreme Lord in charge of the mode of ignorance in the universe. The leader of the Yakshas and Rakshasas is Kuvera, the master treasurer of the demigods, and he is a representation of the Supreme Lord. Meru is a mountain famed for its rich natural resources. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Rudras. In this particular universe, the Rudras appeared because Lord Brahma got very angry. Now, why did he get angry? Okay. Lord Brahma had these four little boys who were called the Kumaras. Actually, Kumar means boy in Sanskrit and also in Hindi, in Shud Hindi. So he had 4 boys, Kumaras. And he wanted these boys to be responsible in life. What does that mean, being responsible? He wanted them to get married. Now, they were 5 years old. Okay. So it's not that he wanted to have the marriage ceremony just there immediately, but he wanted a plan for it. Actually, in the Vedic system, the responsible parents would plan for things in the future. You know, they would say to their little children, you know, in the future you're going to get married, in the future you're going to have a job, in the future you're going to make a lot of money, in the future this and that, you're going to inherit my business. You know, like many parents do. So he said to the 4 Kumaras, I definitely want you to get married. And the 4 Kumaras disobeyed the order of their father, spiritual master. Wow. Actually, Prabhupada said, the only time you can disobey the order of the spiritual master is when he tells you to get married, if you don't want to. There's an interesting story. There was one devotee who approached Prabhupada, and he really wanted to take sannyas. For those of you who don't know, sannyas means a vow never to get married. Just a complete dedication to Krishna and freedom from any sort of entanglement. Of course, there's still responsibilities. You have responsibilities to Krishna. You have responsibilities to the spiritual master. So the 4 Kumaras wanted to be like that, just completely focused on spiritual life without any encumbrance. So they said to their father, no, Dad. Now, you may think this is something ordinary. Well, you know, the kid says no to their father. But in that culture, we're not talking about America now, the 4 Kumaras did not appear in New York, nor in California, nor even in Mississippi. But they appeared on Lord Brahma's planet. And so that was an insult. And the father got very upset. Lord Brahma got very upset. And he controlled his anger. And sometimes when you suppress a particular emotion, it eventually comes out in some other way. I was talking to a devotee the other day, and as I was explaining about suppression and repression, it's something like when you have a balloon, you know how those clowns used to make animals out of balloons. They would twist the balloons and push the balloons in a particular way and pull the balloons in another way. So when they would push the balloons in, at least the balloon had some air in it at that point, then the balloon would pop out in the other direction. So that's what repression and suppression does. When you suppress something, okay, let me tell you the difference of suppression and repression. Suppression means you're aware completely that you are suppressing an emotion or feeling or desire. And repression means you may make a deliberate effort to keep it down, but then you're in denial it's there. You're in complete denial that you have any desire or strategy or anything like that. So anyway, getting to the point, when you suppress or repress things, then it definitely comes out in a different way. Just like we talk about sublimated anger, sublimated lust. So Lord Brahma, being in charge of the mode of passion, got angry, but he suppressed it. And the anger actually manifested from his forehead. I mean, just like you see, if any of us suppress our anger, it manifests in our eyes, like that, and other features in the face. And so with us, if we suppress something, repress something, you know, it just manifests simply in the eyes or in the body or in the heartbeat or whatever. uh, but it's not going to create another living entity. But with Lord Brahma, these 11 Rudras, that means expansions of Rudra, of whom Lord Shiva is the chief, came out of his forehead. Like the third eye, they came out of his forehead. And they were angry because they were a manifestation of his anger. And they started to, let's say, threaten the universe. The universe could have gotten destroyed. So Lord Brahma was thinking, I was angry, I suppressed my anger, and now my anger has personified itself and is threatening to destroy the universe. This is not good. I'm in charge of passion, but anger and destruction are, let's say, manifest from ignorance. Let me just turn off the phone because I don't want to be bothered by my messages. They manifest from ignorance. So what did Lord Brahma do? He was in a dilemma. You know, he couldn't kill these Rudras. Obviously, they were living entities. So he thought, let me create Rudranis, wives for all of them, and their wives will pacify them. So he created 11 Rudranis, and the 11 Rudras got married to 11 Rudranis, and they lived happily ever after. So that's the story of the Rudras, of whom Lord Shiva is predominant. And Lord Shiva is in charge of the mode of ignorance. He's not in ignorance, he's a great devotee of the Lord. And then you have Kuvera. Kuvera is a very interesting personality. He was the half-brother of Ravan, this great demon. Of course, Kuvera is not a demon, he's a devotee of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he's the treasurer, but his children get a little enamored with wealth, too. There's that whole story of Manigriva and Nalakuvara, his children. And it's usually a fact that a rich man's children become spoiled because they're handed everything on a silver platter rather than having to work for things. So they don't learn the value of money. So these two personalities, Manigriva and Nalakuvara, decided basically to become hippies. Not in every sense of the word. But they were intoxicated, yes, and they taken their clothes off, and they were fooling around with ladies in this river, completely naked. And then who comes along but Narada Muni, the great sage? And he sees them, and they see Narada Muni, and they are so intoxicated they didn't even have the sense to cover themselves. So they got cursed to become trees. So even if you're born in a rich family, very good family, there's no guarantee that things are going to be all right. In fact, as Queen Kunti says, Janmaishvarya Shutasya Shibir Enamana Adapuman, that one has a lot of opulence or beauty or fame or learning. These things can bewilder one and deviate one, or at least the attachment to these things can deviate one from the spiritual path. Anyway, that's Kuvera. And Mount Meru is a mountain that has many resources. It's a famous mountain in the Vedic literatures. Okay, next verse. Parodasam jamukyam ham vidiparta brahaspatim senaninam aham skanda sarasam asmi sagaraha. Parodasam, of all priests, ja also, mukyam, the chief, mam, me, vidi, understand, partha, O son of Pritha, brahaspatim, Brahashpati, senaninam, of all commanders, aham, I am, skanda, kartikeya. Sarasam, of all reservoirs of water. Asmi, I am, Sagaraha, the ocean. So a priest, so Arjuna, know me to be the chief. Brahashpati, he's the priest of the demigods. Of generals, I am Kartikeya, one of Lord Shiva's sons, who is the general of the demigods. And of bodies of water, I am the ocean, which is the greatest body. So purport, Indra is the chief demigod of the heavenly planets and is known as the king of heavens. The planet on which he reigns is called Indraloka. Brahaspati is Indra's priest, and since Indra is the chief of all kings, Brahaspati is the chief of all priests. And as Indra is the chief of all kings, similarly Skanda or Kartikeya, the son of Parvati and Lord Shiva, is the chief of all military commanders. And of all bodies of water, the ocean is the greatest. These representations of Krishna only give hints of his greatness. And that's what they're meant for. Just to give hints. And if you love Krishna, you don't need to understand all these hints. But this is for those of us who need to be impressed a little bit. Of course, these things are not that impressive compared to Krishna and his transcendental activities in the spiritual realm. So, Maharshinam Briguraham Girivasme Kamaksharam Yagyanam Japa Yagyosme Astavaranam Himalayaha. Maharishinam, among the great sages, Brigu, Aham, I am, Giram, of vibrations, Asmi, I am, Ekam, Aksharam, Pranava, Yajnam, of sacrifices, Japa, Yajna, chanting, Asmi, I am, Stavaranam, of immovable things, Himalayaha, the Himalayan mountains. Of the great sages, I am Brigu, of vibrations, I am the transcendental Om, of sacrifices, I am the chanting of the holy names, Japa, and of immovable things, I am the Himalayas. Or Himalayas or Himalayas. I think correct pronunciation, the Himalayas. If there was a long A, it would be Himalayas. Himalayas. Anyway, so, let's see. Om we know about, that is AUM. That is Radha, Krishna, and the living entity, which is non-different than the holy name. And we all know about chanting japa, and we all know about the Himalayas, right? And let's talk about Bhrigu. Bhrigu is such a great sage. I'll tell you one story about Bhrigu. He was asked one time to determine who is God. And he had three choices. Brahma, who we mentioned before, Shiva, who we mentioned before, and Vishnu, who we mentioned before. Remember, Vishnu is an expansion of Krishna, not different from Krishna, so he's actually God. So Bhrigu decided, let me come up with some tests to see who is God. It's quite dangerous if you do this particular test, and it didn't end up well for Bhrigu. So what he did, once upon a time, he decided to insult these three personalities. First of all, he insulted Lord Brahma by not offering respects. It's an insult, but not so bad. Lord Brahma got angry, but he controlled his anger. Lord Shiva didn't appear at that point. Then he went to Lord Shiva, and he insulted Lord Shiva with words. Say, you hang out in the crematoriums. Ew. Of course, Lord Shiva is the greatest Vaishnava, but Lord Shiva could have killed him, and he was calmed down by Parvati, so he saw Lord Shiva didn't control his anger either. He wasn't in the mode of goodness, because he was thinking, whoever is in the pure mode of goodness, that person can actually be God, or is actually God. Okay. So then, what does he do? He goes to Vishnu, and with Vishnu, he dreams up even better insults. Not better, a worse insult. Sorry about that. He kicks Vishnu in the chest. And Vishnu, being the greatest, he apologizes for having a hard chest. And what happens is Lakshmi gets really angry with him and curses him. The Brahmins are going to be poor and everything after that time. So this is actually interesting. I was just reading about this psychologically, that the greatest people think less of themselves and the lesser people think more of themselves. And psychologically, this is called the Dunning-Kruger effect. A little lesson for all of you. You can look it up. Your psychological handbooks. What does that mean? That means if someone is really unqualified, they think that they're much more qualified than they are. And if someone is really qualified, they think themselves less qualified than they are. Just like sometimes you hear politicians say, you know, I'm the most intelligent, that was the biggest crowd, uh, I'm the best blank, blank, blank that has ever been. So that means they're really low. Because a sign of being really high is humility. And that applies for devotees too. You know, devotees, like even Lord Chaitanya, he said, I do not love Krishna. If I had any love for Krishna, I wouldn't be able to live. He was experiencing extreme humility. And he even came up with this verse, Trinadapi Sudechena, Tadadivasi Hishnana. And he was applying it to himself. So Brahma, in the purport, the first living creature within the universe, created several sons for the propagation of various kinds of species. Among these sons, Brigo is the most powerful sage. Of all the transcendental vibrations, the Omkara represents Krishna. Of all sacrifices, the chanting of Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, 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 Hare Hare, is the purest representation of Krishna. Sometimes animal sacrifices are recommended, but in the sacrifice of Hare Krishna, there is no question of violence. You find in many primitive religions there's animal sacrifice, that's true. It is the simplest and purest. Whatever is sublime in the world is a representation of Krishna. Therefore, the Himalayas, the greatest mountains in the world, also represent him. The mountain named Meru was mentioned in the previous verse, but Meru is sometimes movable, whereas the Himalayas are never movable. Thus, the Himalayas are greater than Meru. So there you see, one opulence of Krishna is greater than another opulence of Krishna. Doesn't reflect on Krishna. It just means whatever is opulent is a manifestation of Krishna. Here's another one. Ashvata sarvavikshanam devarshinam chanarada gandharvanam chicharata siddhanam kapilo munahi ashvataha. The banyan tree, sarvavikshanam, of all trees, devarishinam, of all the sages amongst the demigods, Cha, and Narada, Gandharvanam, of the citizens of the Gandharva planet, Chicharata, Siddhanam, of all those who are perfected, Kapila Muni. Of all trees, I'm the banyan tree. Of course, the banyan tree will be described in the 15th chapter of the Bhagavadgita in a different way. So the banyan tree is such an amazing tree. It can cover an acre or 2 or 3 of land, and you don't know where the roots are, or whether the roots are the branches or the branches of the roots. It's an amazing tree. I am Narada, and of the sages among the demigods, I am Narada. And I think everyone understands who Narada Muni is. Narada Muni is the Narada. He's the person who keeps traveling and preaches Krishna consciousness with his Veena. So of the Gandharvas, I am Chicharata. He's one of the Gandharvas who sing and dance very nicely. And among perfected beings, I am the sage Kapila. So Kapila is actually an incarnation of Krishna. And this Kapila Muni, he instructed his mother Devahuti in the science of Krishna consciousness. There's a large part of the 3rd canto of Srimad Bhagavatam dedicated to the teachings of Lord Kapila Dev. So he is Vishnu Tattva. The banyan tree, Ashvata, is one of the highest and most beautiful trees, and people in India often worship it as one of their daily morning rituals. Among the demigods, they also worship Narada, who is considered the greatest devotee in the universe. Thus, he is the representation of Krishna as a devotee. Now, what do we see? We have the Panchatattva. Everyone's heard of the Panchatattva? No, you haven't heard of the Panchatattva. Panchatattva is Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who is God, Krishna in the mood of Radharani. You have Lord Nityananda, who is the same as Balaram, who is also God. You have Advaita Acharya, who is the expansion or incarnation of Mahavishnu. He's also God, Vishnu Tattva. They're not different. And then you have Gadadhar, who is the Shakti, the internal energy, the Ladini Shakti. That's Radharani, expansion of Radharani. And ultimately, the 5th person you have in the Panchatattva on the altar is Srivas Thakur, who is Narada Muni. Narada Muni appeared as Srivas Thakur. So he's considered the greatest devotee amongst the Jiva souls in the universe. Thus he is the representation of Krishna as a devotee. Incidentally, Narada Muni is present on many different levels simultaneously in the spiritual world and in the material world. And Narada Muni comes to hear kirtans. Once upon a time, there was a kirtan going on, I think it was in Los Angeles, and Prabhupada said that Narada Muni had come, and the devotees asked, what was Narada Muni doing when he came to hear the kirtan? Prabhupada said Narada Muni was laughing. And the devotee said, why was he laughing? And Prabhupada said, to see all the malachas and yavanas dancing and chanting Hare Krishna. In other words, he was laughing with joy. I mean, it's just like, let's give an example. Let's say if I went to the zoo here in North Carolina, we have got a beautiful zoo in Asheboro, and went into the monkey cage. Well, not in the monkey cage, outside the monkey cage. And all the monkeys had their hands raised high and were chanting Nitai Gauranga. I think I would start laughing too. So, for those of us who are from the Western world, I mean, not that we look like monkeys, hopefully not, but the civilization is actually like a monkey civilization. And those of you who are from India who came to the Western world, you're trying to imitate the monkey civilization. It's interesting. Sometimes people come from other countries that thinking America is like the pinnacle. Of course, not anymore because of the political situation and the virus. But previously they come to America. America, we got to come to America. It's the pinnacle. So it's just like saying, let's go to the zoo. Actually, there was an interesting song in the 1960s. I don't remember all the details. It was about the zoo, how everybody in America, and everywhere, of course, is a zoo. Why are they in the zoo? Because eating, sleeping, mating, defending. That's what people are doing. America, that's it. That summarizes everything that people are doing in a more sophisticated way. Once upon a time, someone was talking about how people sometimes go in airplanes and they eat a big meal. And they're eating like pigs. And so the pig is on the ground. And, of course, he's eating like a pig, too. Actually, the pig is more civilized because the pig doesn't eat prohibited things for his particular species, whereas the human being can eat any damn thing. So anyway, so it's like the person in the airplane who's eating in an unrestricted fashion, he's a flying pig. Whereas the pig on the ground, he's just an ordinary pig. So which is better, a flying pig or a pig on the ground? I prefer the pig on the ground rather than the pig that flies around. So anyway, sorry about that. So basically, human civilization, or so-called human civilization, if it doesn't encompass anything more than eating, sleeping, mating, defending, even in this sophisticated way. You know, you go into a restaurant and you raise your cups of wine, let's make a toast. You know, that's a sophisticated thing. You know, animals don't use forks and knives and everything like that. So even if a human being is being very sophisticated, in essence, what he's doing is no different than what the animals are doing. Eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. And, you know, there's movies, so many movies now about mating. The animals, did you ever see an animal watch a movie about mating? No. They don't have to watch a movie about these things. Anyway, the Gandharva planet is filled with entities who sing beautifully. And among them, the best singer is Chitraratha. Actually, Arjuna had an encounter with him and he defeated him. He actually burnt Chitraratha's chariot, and Chitraratha became his friend. There's a whole story about that in the Mahabharata. Amongst the perfect living entities, Kapila, the son of Devahuti, whom we spoke about this morning, is a representative of Krishna. He is considered an incarnation of Krishna, and his philosophy is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto. Later on, another Kapila became famous, but his philosophy was atheistic. In other words, there were two Kapilas. One was the bona fide Kapila, the other one was rascal Kapila. Thus, there's a gulf of difference between them. Text 27. Uchaishravasam ashvanam vidimam amritodbhavan airavatam gajendranam naranam janaradipam. Uchaishravasam, Uchaishrava, ashvanam among horses, vidi, no, mam, me, amrita udbhavam, produced from the churning of the ocean, airavata, gaja indranam, of the lordly elephants, naranam, among human beings, cha, and nara adipam, the king. Of horses, know me to be Uchayashrava, produced during the churning of the ocean for nectar. Of lordly elephants, I am Airavata, and among men, I am the monarch. So, I guess I should describe what it means to churn the ocean for nectar. Okay, once upon a time, there were two groups of entities in the universe, the good guys and the bad guys. Okay? Good guys and bad guys. Hold on. This monitor is giving me a little trouble. Okay. There were good guys and bad guys in the universe. Okay. We understand that. And the bad guys were winning. And so the good guys, they went to Krishna. Said, what should we do? And they said, Krishna said, when in doubt, make a truce. And in that truce, or during that truce, you should churn the ocean and get this nectar. If anyone drinks this nectar, they will live a long time, be almost immortal. It's called the nectar of immortality, Amrits. So, to make a long story short, the good guys and the bad guys, the demigods and the demons, made a deal, and they were churning, using a specific rope named Vasuki, anyway. And Krishna had to appear in many ways to help them, many different ways to help them. He became a tortoise and held him under a mountain there, and also had his back scratched, etc., as Mandara Mountain was actually on his back. Anyway, a long story. So there were so many things that came out of that churning. There was poison at one time, and that poison was swallowed by Lord Shiva. Lakshmi came out. Lakshmi was accepted by Lord Narayan. These are all the pastimes. Really a beautiful story. And this horse, Uchayashrava, came out during the churning of the ocean for nectar. And finally, the nectar came out. And there was a deal between the good guys and bad guys, devotees and demons, that they would share it equally. But the bad guys, the demons, took all the nectar for themselves. And then the good guys, the demigods, they went to Krishna and said, what are we going to do? We can't defeat the bad guys. Please tell us what to do. And Krishna said, I'll take care of it for you. Just hold on, boys. So Krishna took the form of a beautiful lady named Mohini Murti. Means the form of bewilderment. Mohini Murti. So this Mohini Murti, form of the Lord, expansion of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, non-different from Krishna, went before the demons, and the demons practically, their jaws opened, their mouth opened up and their jaws dropped. Oh, what's that? And they became so enamored with her beauty, they asked this Mohini Murti to divide up the nectar fairly, because they were also fighting amongst themselves as to who would take the nectar first. Even demons, they fight amongst each other when there's an opportunity. So anyway, so they were fighting, and she basically said, Krishna, she basically said, how can you trust me? And they said, you are beautiful, we trust you. And kind of logical, isn't it? She bewildered them, he bewildered them. And then Krishna, in the form of Mohini, took the nectar and fed it to the good guys instead of the bad guys, the demigods instead of the demons. And then what happened, some of the demons, like Rahu and Ketu, they saw what was happening, and Rahu snuck in, and he started to drink the nectar. He made believe he was a demigod, a good guy. And Krishna caught him and chopped his head off, but the nectar had already gone down a little bit, so the head remained alive. It's a wonderful story that's there in the Mahabharata, in so many Puranas. Anyway, one day everyone will get a chance to hear that. So purport. The devotee, demigods, and the demons, asuras, once took part in the churning of the sea. From this churning, nectar and poison were produced. I talked about this, and Lord Shiva drank the poison. From the nectar were produced many entities, of which there was a horse named Uchayashrava. Another animal produced from the nectar was an elephant named Airavata. Because these two animals were produced from nectar, they have special significance, and they are representatives of Krishna. Amongst the human beings, the king is the representative of Krishna, because Krishna is the maintainer of the universe, and the kings who are appointed on account of their godly qualifications are maintainers of their kingdoms. Kings like Maharaj Yudhisthira, Maharaj Parikshit, and Lord Ram were all highly righteous kings who always thought of the citizens' welfare. We'll talk about that in a second. In Vedic literature, the king is considered to be the representative of God. In this age, however, with the corruption of the principles of religion, monarchy decayed and is now finally abolished. It is to be understood that in the past, however, people were more happy under righteous kings. So let's explain this a little bit. The kings were not absolute in their power. There was a system of checks and balances. Just like in the United States, we have a system of checks and balances. We have the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of the government, which are supposed to check and balance each other. However, when you have people in, let's say, all three of them or two of them, let's say the executive head, who happens to be in America, a president, and his cronies are put into position in the legislative and judicial branch, then you have a lot of brown-nosers, and the executive can get away with anything. That was not the intention of the founders of this great country, America. Anyway, so in the Vedic system, the kings were not absolute either, because they had brahmanas to check them. And these brahmanas had so much power, if they decided they could get rid of the king, not by taking up arms, but just by pronouncing certain mantras. And the king would die. There was one king, this is a story in the Bhagavatam, his name was Vena, and he was a really bad king because he basically declared himself to be God, or the sum total of all the demigods, and stopping sacrifices. So the Brahmanas thought, we got to get rid of this guy. And so they pronounced some mantras. Vena died. But because there was no king after Vena died, there was a problem. There were dacoits, that means thieves and rogues, and they were robbing people and killing people. Described there were dust clouds because there were so many riots going on. So anyway, so then what happened, the Brahmanas thought, we need another king, but there's no one qualified. This Vena, he didn't have any kids. There's no one in the kingdom qualified. So let's do some genetic engineering. Wow. Nowadays we're so proud of GMO food, GMO people. Whoops. Let me just knock that out. This is bad. We're so proud of GMO food or GMO people. Let me get back to it. Hold on. Someone's calling. Okay. Yeah, I remember where we are. We're so proud of GMO food or GMO people. Cloning the sheep. There was one sheep that was cloned named Dolly. But in those days, they could do all that with different procedures, which I'm not aware of. Sometimes these procedures are called churning, and there's several stories of that. But anyway, they took the genes of this Vena and extracted the bad genes and left the good genes. Wow. That is impressive. You know how many genes there are? I mean, ooh, DNA and RNA, DNA strands, wow. Modern science for you. So they extracted the bad genes, got the good genes, and out of the good genes came Prithu Maharaj. And they even produced the next king's wife out of the good genes. Wow. So that shows that the kings were not independently absolute. And they were simply interested in the welfare of their citizens. They were ready to sacrifice their own lives. If there was a war, they would be on the front lines of the battle. Not that they would be hiding underground, protected by armies of, whatever, around them. But they would be out there fighting. Like you see Alexander the Great, for example. I'm not saying he was Krishna conscious, but he exemplified what it means to be a king as far as the fighting and everything like that. So in other words, they wouldn't declare war or an unnecessary war because the king knew that he was going to be right out there risking his life. So anyway, so Krishna is represented by these righteous kings, these dynamic kings, these heroic, because a Kshatriya is actually qualified by his heroism and strength. Strength and heroism. He's ready to die to carry out the mission of helping the people and helping people be Krishna conscious. Even there's that story in Lord Ram's pastimes, that there was a dog who was in his kingdom, and the dog complained against the Brahmin. And the Brahmana was punished because the dog complained against him. I'll tell the story real quickly. Once upon a time, there was a dog who knocked on the palace door. Lakshman came and let the dog in because Ram said, I want to hear what the dog has to say. The dog said, this Brahmin has been beating me. Lord Ram called for the Brahmin, and he said, have you beaten this dog? The Brahmin said, yes, because I was hungry. You know how it is with the low blood sugar. You start to get angry a little bit. And Ram said, how should we punish this Brahmin? Brahmins shouldn't really be punished because this is an injunction. You're not supposed to punish Brahmins. So how do you punish someone who's not supposed to be punished? Everybody was completely bewildered as to what should be done because the dog had his rights too. And then a dog said, I have an idea. Of course, in those days, the dogs could talk. So the dog said, I have an idea. And Lord Ram said, what's the idea? And the dog said, make him in charge of the ashram. And all the different soldiers and other brahmanas, they were bewildered. What kind of thing is this? This is actually a benediction. And Lord Ram said, no, it's not. Ask the dog why he asked for that particular type of punishment, which appears to be a benediction. And the dog said, guess what, buddies? In my last life, I was in charge of the ashram, and because I was in charge of the ashram, I was responsible for the bad things going on in the ashram. Therefore, guess what? Here I am, a dog. And so I want this guy to become a dog in his next life. Anyway, that should not discourage people from wanting to be in charge of some ashram. Because if you chant Hare Krishna and you're sincere, you will be absolved as long as you try your best in those situations. Okay, on that happy note, let us take some questions. And we have to unmute you so you can ask some questions. Okay. You are all unmuted, so ask some questions.
Hare Krishna Gurudev.
Haribol!
I have a question.
That sounds like Chitraleka.
No, this is Swapna Gurudev.
Oh, I thought it was Chitraleka. Anyway, so I'm trying to find your little window here where you... Okay, Swapna. Oh, Swapna. Yeah, you sounded like Chitraleka. Anyway, so...
Yes.
So what's up, Swapna?
Can you please elaborate what is a conditioned soul mean?
Oh, okay. What does a conditioned soul mean? Very interesting. So, conditioned soul means that one is an illusion. I know that word is, it's hard to relate to the word condition and illusion. that you're an illusion, thinking you're something that you're not. You're conditioned by illusion. That you actually, let's talk about conditioning. Oh, that's really interesting. Actually, now that I think of it, I can come up with some political examples, which I usually do sometime in class. So, what do they say? If you hear a lie long enough from a politician, then you're conditioned by it, right? If you hear something enough times, you actually believe it. I'll give you actually forget about the politician. I'll give you another example that Prabhupada gave. Once upon a time, there was a man whose friends wanted to play a trick on him. And so they wanted to convince the man that he had become a ghost. Prabhupada tells the story. And so they all met together, conspiracy. Here's a real conspiracy theory. They all met together, and they said, whenever you meet this particular gentleman, you tell him he's become a ghost. Oh, you're a ghost. So the first person said, oh, you're a ghost. And he said, no, I'm not. What kind of nonsense is this? Second person, oh, you become a ghost. Third person, oh, you become a ghost. So by the time it came to the 10th person, he was conditioned, and he thought that he had become a ghost. He said, I've become a ghost. So that's conditioning. Or another example of conditioning was done by my friend Pavlov. I don't know if you know my friend Pavlov. He's an old buddy. But Pavlov showed conditioned responses. What sort of conditioned responses did he show? That every time he gave the dog something to eat, he would ring a bell. And so every time the dogs heard the bell, they would salivate. And so after he stopped giving them food, even though he rang the bell, they would salivate because they were conditioned by constant impressions, just like we talk about the soul having different impressions from one lifetime to another. So let's get back to the political sphere. We find that certain politicians, who shall remain nameless to protect the innocent, they condition their followers by saying false things. Actually, what they do is they call fake news or phony news or something like that. So after a while, you start to believe it, or they tell their followers, "I'm the greatest prime minister, or the greatest whatever that America's ever had." And everyone thinks, yes, yes. Or they come up with a slogan, "Make ISKCON great again." So MIGA. It's called a MIGA. They have hats with MIGAs on it. Anyway, so I think you understand what I'm talking about. I don't want to get too far into this because my blood will start to boil after a while. But people get into it. It's like crowd mentality. They become conditioned by it, and they actually start to believe. If you tell people a lie enough times, that lie actually becomes true as far as people's memories are concerned. That's conditioned. To be unconditioned means to be free of those sorts of impressions, and that comes from chanting the Lord's holy names. Cheto Darpana Marjanam Baba Mahadvagni Nirapanam. When you chant Krishna's names, you become unconditioned and free. Like we're so conditioned by different things, thinking that certain people are my relatives, or this is my country, or this is my body, this is my body and everything connected with the body. So we're conditioned by that. So the whole idea is to become unconditioned or liberated. Thank you for your question. That's a very good question.
Thank you, Guru.
By chanting Hare Krishna, we become unconditioned, and we vote for the right person in the election. For those of you in America, that is a political advertisement paid for by His Holiness Sri Krishna Goswami. So anyway, I'm not saying who the right person is because that's illegal if I tell you. But don't become conditioned by propaganda. fake news. Okay, so who else has a question?
Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept
Okay.
my humble obeisances and all glories to Srila Prabhupada.
My blessings, all glories to Prabhupada. What's up?
Maharaj, I was having one question from last few days after I was hearing one of the lectures from you, when you said that Arjuna heard Bhagavad Gita from Krishna for approximately 35 minutes,
Yes,
and he understood everything.
yes.
So suddenly one thought was pondering onto my head at that point of time, like when Abhimanyu was killed that evening. He was taking a vow out of emotion, saying that the next day he was going to kill Jayadratha no matter what. And if
Yes.
he is not able to do that, he's going to get into the fire without
Yeah.
even asking the Lord.
Yes.
So my question here is, maybe I'm completely ignorant and I don't understand Bhagavad Gita well. But the question I was having was, when someone understood Bhagavad Gita, that too when the Lord was speaking, it was like he should have, or probably my understanding is that the jiva, he comes for a particular reason, and once his karma is being done, he will leave the world, right? Then why would someone
He'll
be
stay.
really emotional?
Well, he may stay here in the world to serve Krishna.
True, that's true. But when a jiva is leaving the world, and especially knowing that the body is not permanent and it is the spirit soul, why would someone be so emotionally attached that one wants to take such a vow, especially after
Well,
hearing Bhagavad Gita from the Lord?
I got the question. I got the question already. It's just that devotees also have emotions, and uh, and actually Abhimanyu was Krishna's greatest favorite grandson or nephew. Sorry, Krishna's greatest nephew, and Krishna loved him too. So for someone to have emotions, and sometimes these emotions for some time cause us to forget the philosophy. Even the greatest devotee, if there's some emotions there, then you may temporarily forget the Bhagavad Gita. He understood the whole Bhagavad Gita, but Abhimanyu was his favorite son. I mean, you can't. While we're here in this material world, we're not meant to be so callous that if, let's say, someone's son dies, or if you're Krishna conscious, if your wife dies, you just say, well, she wasn't her body anyway. That's a misunderstanding of Krishna consciousness. I mean, sometimes immature people think that Krishna consciousness is like that. Like when I first joined the movement, my mother was threatening to die because I had joined the Hare Krishna movement. I was born in a nice Gujarati family. So my mother was actually threatening. Every other day I would get the message that your mother is dying because you joined the Hare Krishna movement. And as a young person, you don't have your emotions fully developed. So I just thought, well, she's not her body. And if she dies thinking of me, phew, what a great fortune. So when you get older, you see, how old are you now, Prashant?
I just turned 40, Maharaj, on August 3rd.
So you're older. Actually, it says that before 35, your brain isn't fully developed. So
Even now it's
and
the same.
so when you get older, you actually are well-rounded. Devotees are well-rounded. I mean, even Krishna got angry when things happened in the battle. Even though he was God, he knew they were going to happen. And you have Krishna getting angry at Jayadratha. But Arjuna just lost it. I mean, that's natural. Pure devotees are not robots. They still have a human component while they're here in this material world. And that's because the Lord has these pastimes too. I mean, it's just like, it would be incredible for Arjuna to say, okay, Abhimanyu is dead. I guess Krishna knows everything, past, present, and future. It was supposed to happen like that. It's cool, Krishna. I know there was a reason for it. I'm detached. I'm not the body. It's okay. You know, let's go to the next day of battle. Arjuna had to show some passion in the battle too, or else how could he fight? So these are parts of the Lord. This is part of the Lord's pastimes, but a pure devotee definitely has a human side to him too. I mean, you have Prabhupada, who is an absolutely pure devotee, and he's having a dream, several dreams, and spiritual master is coming in his dream and telling him, take sannyas, Abhay. And Prabhupada said he was horrified. Because Prabhupada, he felt concern for his family. Even when Prabhupada left this world, the devotees found out that he actually had left a stipend, that means some money and some funds, for his previous family before he took sannyas. Now one may say, is that appropriate? Yes, it's appropriate because people have feelings. A devotee is a feeling, breathing entity who ultimately will do whatever Krishna wants. But in the meantime, it's hard. It's hard because we also have connections in this world. Well, what to speak of when Arjuna was told by Krishna to fire arrows at grandfather Bhishma? That's another example.
Yeah.
And Arjuna, of course, he was using Shikandi, as a shield, a human shield, so that grandfather Bhishma wouldn't fire his arrows back at him. But Krishna had to tell Arjuna, come on, fire him, fire. And Arjuna was going, oh my God, he's my grandfather. And Arjuna practically had to close his eyes as he was taking his bow and arrows and just shooting the arrows at grandfather Bhishma. I mean, he was in pain. He knew the Bhagavadgita. So a devotee knows the philosophy, however, and he does the right thing, but a lot of things are painful or struggles or tests for a devotee. That's just life. So it's not, not a devotee is like this transcendental thing that just has no feelings or anything like that. That would be. I mean, just like in Prabhupada, sometimes physically he felt cold, physically he felt warm, he was in pain. I just heard the story today when Prabhupada had a stroke in New York in the early days, and Prabhupada was in pain, or not in pain, but he couldn't move half of his body because of the stroke. So that's not conditioning, because a devotee will always function on the intelligence platform and do the right thing. However, emotions can be very strong. And one should not try to repress those emotions. One should express them, but ultimately do the right thing. That's the whole point.
Yes.
Do the right thing. Use your intelligence to understand what the right thing is. And Arjuna he lost it. He lost it, and he vowed to kill Jayadratha the next day, and he said, if I don't kill Jayadratha in the battlefield the next day before the sun is set, then I'm going to immolate myself. But that was because of his extreme love for his son, and he's a person. Don't make devotees impersonal or robots or machines. Good question. Actually, it was a very good question because it helps us understand the nature of a devotee. We think the devotee has no feelings. Prabhupada cried when devotees left the movement. Prabhupada was in anxiety over the safety of devotees when they went to Pakistan to preach, when they went to Mayapur to buy property. Tamal Krishna Maharaj went to Mayapur to buy property. Prabhupada was in anxiety. And all these are symptoms of love for a devotee. But, pure devotees have feelings. And you can hurt their feelings. So,
No, Maharaj.
okay. Yeah, so that's Arjuna. Yeah, thank you for
Thank
the
you
nice
so
question.
much, Maharaj. Yeah, thank you so much. I had this question all the time running out in my mind, whether, one can have that attachment or not and all. So yeah, that clears.
Yeah, I mean, even a pure devotee, they'll love their family too. I mean, you can imagine a pure devotee lady who has a baby and she says, "Well, it's not my baby," you know. Be very, it would actually be traumatic for the poor little baby. I remember in the early days of the movement, sometimes the grahastas were preached to that, that's not your baby. That baby is Krishna's baby. And then they without understanding properly would put their child in someone else's hands, and you have the child extremely traumatized. So the mother's love for a child, or the husband and wife, they love each other. It's good. It's good. Actually, it's a good thing. There should be love. There should be some attachment. And ultimately, like I could say, I love my mother, but I'm not going to listen to anything she says either. Yeah, I love her. I want the best thing for her. But the best thing is I don't listen to her. So it's interesting. Sometimes we get people coming to the temple that they have to come to the temple. How to explain this? And without their parents knowing it. I mean, generally it's from people from India. Without their parents knowing it. Or they have to get permission from their mother. Even when they're 35
Yes,
or 40 years old to come to the temple.
very true.
And then we
I
have
know
then
what
we
you're
have
saying.
then we have other people who've actually taken initiation 10 years ago, and their parents haven't found out because the parents would kill them if they found out that they had taken initiation. And so they have to hide their mobile phone, so God forbid the parents see their name. Dear Krishna Das. Who's that? Because they're afraid of their mother. Oh my God.
It, to me, it looks like you are just trying to read my mind, Maharaj, because whatever is going on, you are just opening and it's putting like an open book and all. Exactly. The events
No,
that are happening.
yeah, I'm not. So just to tell everybody online that I never asked Prashant about his mother, never had a discussion about it before. But, anyway, just mother, matriarchal culture.
Yes.
Like Mother Yashoda. Krishna had never listened to Mother Yashoda. So Krishna is the ideal son. When it actually the story is that when Krishna was supposed to be sleeping in bed at night, he actually just went out to dance with the gopis just to trick his mother. So even Krishna was the original like that. He went out to dance with the gopis. And then Krishna comes back after the whole night with Radharani. And because, he was having such a good time, he actually by accident puts on Radharani's clothes, which are blue, and Radharani puts on his clothes, which are yellow. And Yashoda Mai comes in the morning to wake Krishna up. And as I said, Krishna didn't listen to his mother. But to wake Krishna up, and she sees Krishna dressed in blue. She said, "What's happening? Why did you?" And Krishna lies to his mother. Can you imagine lying to your mother? He says, "Actually, I put on Balaram's clothes by accident, because Balaram dresses in blue clothes." So Krishna's not the most obedient son. And actually, his mother didn't want him to go to Mathura, but he did anyway. So I'm not trying to encourage anyone. The best thing is you do what's best for your mother. You should love your mother. You should love your husband, love your wife, love your children. And Krishna consciousness is all love. Okay, on that happy note, I think we have to end right now. Thank you for your question. All glories to Prabhupada. Prabhupada Ki Jai, Gaur Premananda, Hari Hari.